Our next guest will be there signing his new book, Mr. Smith Goes to Prison. Jeff Smith, former Missouri State Senator who spent a year in jail. What my year behind bars taught me about the American prison crisis. Let's talk about drugs and what you experienced in prison. They make a difference between non-violent drug offenders and violent drug offenders. What did you see in prison in your year with drugs? What would you tell people?
Well, so the majority of the guys I got locked up with had been dealing cocaine, mostly crack cocaine. Some had dealt powder if they were higher level offenders. Pretty much anybody that the feds go after as opposed to state when it comes to drugs is a fairly high level guy. Otherwise, the feds don't get involved. The slight minority were dealing meth or oxy. Basically, the white guys were in there for meth and most of the black guys were in there for crack. What did I see in terms of their violence or non-violence? Yeah. It's prison. So almost every one of these guys had started in high security level prisons or, higher than we were in. And then they'd behaved okay and come down to the prison that I was at. So, but it's still prison. So like if you cut in line, you're going to be in a fight. If you change the TV channel, you're going to be in a fight. If you, do anything, brush up against somebody the wrong way, like you just have to be careful about the things you do because people are on a trigger edge all the time. It's a hair trigger environment and people are tense. People get angry over small slights because they're keeping so much emotion inside. In prison, you learn not to show any emotion. You don't show fear. You don't show weakness. If you do, you can very easily be preyed upon. And so people have a lot kind of bottled up inside, and it comes out often violently.
I know you enough, and I knew you before you went in, if you will, if that's the lingo, that never in a million years did you think you'd find yourself in prison. When you went to prison, did you get any advice? Did anybody pull you aside? Did you just learn this on as you went? What was your state of mind as you went to prison?
My state of mind was that I'll figure it out. I had one lunch that a judge in town arranged for me with a guy who'd been locked up, who he was friends with, and it was awful. The guy seemed to maybe have mental illness, maybe that he had gotten in prison, I don't know. Prison is sort of a dumping ground, sadly, in this country for people who suffer from mental illness. But this guy was a white-collar offender, and the judge thought it would be good for me to learn from him, and he talked for 2 hours at the lunch and was just rambling and saying kind of crazy stuff. And frankly, it wasn't a good use of my time, and so anyone else who offered, I just declined and figured I'd learn myself.
So you basically shut down?
I basically, you know what I did? I did a lot of push-ups to get ready, and then I got there, and I tried to keep my mouth shut for the first couple months and just watch and learn, and I learned a lot. And I had a couple guys who had a lot of wisdom who took me under their wing. I worked at the prison warehouse on the loading dock. We moved about 35 or 40,000 pounds of food every day. We unloaded all the food that came in to feed about 2,500 prisoners. And we spent a lot of time together. It's a full-time job. And so a couple of those guys mentored me and advised me on how not to get in trouble. And then one of them stood up and protected me at a critical moment when a guy who was interested in me sexually, who came to all of my basketball games in prison, came to all my softball games, cheered me on ostentatiously, and then followed me around the compound, banged on his cell whenever I walked by, and hollered at me.
So he was basically stalking you?
Yeah. And one of the guys at the warehouse stood up and basically got rid of him at a key moment, and then he never bothered me again. So I had a few guys who looked out for me, counseled me, and protected me.
Do you still keep in contact with some people?
Some of them, not as many as I should.
Yeah. Some of them are still in jail, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going forward, when you talk to people, elected officials, experts, and you say, we can be doing it better, what do they tell you? Is there an appetite to change the prison system?
I've heard some guys tell me some version of the riff. Hey, look, nobody ever lost an election for being too tough on crime. Right. Nobody ever lost an election for being too harsh on prisoners. But that's really a short-sighted view. We talked off the air about Denmark, which you visited recently,
right,
which has, a extremely low crime rate. And you said that they're closing prisons there because people aren't committing many crimes. And one of the reasons is because the way they operate their prisons is a humane, rehabilitative way. In the United States, a lot of policymakers, and especially elected officials, are afraid to spend money on prisoners because they're afraid it'll cost them an election. But they're being penny wise, pound foolish. We know two things can help people not reoffend. The first one is educational advancement while they're in prison. The second one is helping them stay in touch with their loved ones while they're there and have community support to get through their bid intact psychologically. And in this country right now, we don't facilitate either of those things. We offer very little in the way of educational instruction or vocational training inside of prisons, and we make it prohibitively expensive for people to stay in touch with loved ones. I made $5.25 for a full-time job in prison. That's not per hour, that's per month. If phone calls cost $1.30 a minute, that means you can basically, and you need to get soap and deodorant and shampoo. How are you really going to be able to stay in touch with the people who cared about you on the outside? It's very difficult. And so we need to do more, and we need policymakers to understand that they're just costing taxpayers a ton of money in the long run by not doing more to make our prisons more rehabilitative.
I would vote for you today more than I ever would have before because you've experienced it. And unfortunately, you don't have a chance to win an election today. You're more valuable as an elected official today since spending a year in jail than you were before.
Well, I appreciate that. There actually is a convicted felon in Congress. Did you know that?
What's that?
There actually is a convicted felon in Congress. And don't make the joke, well, there's 435 of them. But there's a guy from Florida who was a federal judge who got caught taking bribes, and then he came back and ran for Congress and got elected. So there's no prohibition on running for Congress. Not that I'm going to.
Right.
But I'm trying to take advantage of that. But I speak to different state legislatures in different states. Mm-hmm. And address them on both ethics reform and then talk about criminal justice reform. So I'm trying to make lemonade out of lemons and help my experience mean something to policymakers and ultimately to people who are incarcerated.
Because if the argument is, I'm a businessman, I can run government, great. You can say, I was a prisoner, I know how to solve the problems, right? I mean, I can run the military, I was a soldier. So the argument being is I was there. I've seen what works and I've seen what doesn't work.
I've definitely seen it from all sides in a way that few elected officials ever will.
Do you have more time or do you have to go?
I have a few more minutes.
That's Jeff Smith is our guest. He'll be at Left Bank Books tonight for a book signing and a book reading. His new book, Mr. Smith Goes to Prison, What My Year Behind Bars Taught Me in About American Prison Crisis. Left Bank Books tonight, 7 o'clock. Blurred by Howard Dean and just about everybody else. Back in a moment. Big 550.